So officially, welcome to a well-being session with Paul. Paul, as I affectionately call him, Paul from Symbol. Paul is our guest speaker today, and what we've planned for you. So as we go through this learning journey with this new assessment, we've had the e-learn with more of the technical approach and the how-to that you've had access to start to play with the well-being assessment and learn about it. We've run some peer practice sessions where it has literally been about rolling up your sleeves, getting your hands dirty, and playing with the data with the well-being assessment. And for the next leg of the journey, really looking to Paul with his experience in the pilots that were run as we were developing the program, the client experience and some of the impacts from a client perspective. And so Paul will take you on a journey with the pilots and some of his experience, firsthand experience, using the well-being assessment. So we are super excited to have Paul here and help us to really take it to that end part, the most important part, which is the client. So Paul, with that, I am going to pass the baton over to you.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you, and great to see everyone. So yeah, I am going to share some experience, and to kick off that is I don't want to in any way claim that we know exactly what we're doing already. All right. We've been doing 3 of these. Of course, we've been doing values and culture programs for a longer time, but this is really a new area. And somehow, in exploring these results together with the client, that also helps because it leaves a lot of space for new things to come up. So that's the kickoff, and also I'm really excited to see Crystal here. So anywhere I go off track from a theoretical perspective, please help me out. All right, so let's share my screen and do some of this. That should be visible now. Is that correct?
You're good.
All right, great. So the 3 surveys, we've been doing them in one company, but a large one. And so thousands of people. So these departments, these teams are spread. And it's 3 different stories, which makes it really interesting. In preparing for this, Mel and I talked about these different results, and since these are first experiences, it's really great that they're so different because it leads to many different insights. And even from a process perspective, from a consulting process perspective, they're very different. But first, how do I get this to move? First, a bit. So this is a bit about me, so you know who's talking to you. It's very full, which is how my life sometimes feels. So on the top left, the most important people in my life: my wife, my daughter, and my son. Son's 22, my daughter's 20, and I won't talk about my wife's age; she won't appreciate. Engineering background, extremely technical. Sometime in the past, early career, my job was I got paid to break into companies to test their IT security. So that level of technical stuff, so really nerd level. But then through becoming a supervisor, got more into people related stuff. And through many trainings, educations, many confronting moments, many days looking in the mirror, got into more people-focused work, mainly in technically oriented companies like industrial companies, but sometimes also other organizations. I love different cultures, different languages, and the big picture on the screen is one of my hobbies. Is organizing live streams for matches, sports matches like that. And this is a gender equal sport. It's boys and girls in one team. So as far as I'm concerned, this is the sports answer to Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which is still not very known in the world, but it's a great sport. And then there's all kinds of other stuff that I won't talk too much about. Then that doesn't work. Okay, a bit about our company. This is probably the most clear explanation why we created Zimbal about 15 years ago. It's congruence in well-being at all levels. And so back then we didn't talk about well-being surveys yet, but we did recognize that if a company has an unhealthy culture, it will be really hard to have a healthy contribution or a valuable contribution to society. And one of the big insights in this area was I was working for a company in the energy industry, so power plants, and their mission was to strive for fossil-free energy, and yet their employees were leaving the company because they felt they weren't contributing enough, which is really interesting and completely down to their internal culture. So that's what we're helping our clients with. Then this is more of the visionary part of that. So why do organizations exist these days? Both towards their employees, but also towards their clients and market and stakeholders. So that's more of the strategic version of the previous picture. We've been doing that for 25 years, and for the last 13 years under the name Zimbal. We're a relatively small company, owned by 2 people, working with many freelance people. And we're having great fun in our programs. At the moment, I'm in Leeds in the UK, and we are based in Holland, by the way, in the Netherlands. But at the moment, we're doing a large program, 3-year program here in the UK. So, well-being in pharma. So with this client, we've been working many years, and we have the agreement. We don't talk about their name because that's in pharmaceutical industry, that's legally very complex. So we don't mention name. We work for multiple pharmaceutical companies, so that's easier. There's no direct link. We don't mention department names or anything else. And please don't ask questions in that direction. I'd like to respect this confidentiality. They are very supportive towards us to share these stories. As a matter of fact, I spoke to one of the managers this morning, and she said, yes, please, again, emphasizing the importance of sharing these learnings, because she hopes many people and organizations learn from them and benefit from this. So we are going to look at 3 different teams. The first is a QC. QC meaning quality control. So that's all the labs in a pharmaceutical department. They test the quality of their medicine. They are, in the end, the people that, from a personal responsibility point of view, guarantee the medicine that we all buy is safe. It's a team of leaders. They embarked on a journey, and they were seeking for the next step in their development. So no big problems, no big burnout issues or anything like that. They were just looking for the next level, and they thought, this is interesting. Let's see how we can benefit. The second is a production department. We have been working with them for about 5 to 6 years already. So in the other BVC in Action webinar we did, I did a story on their journey from a values perspective. So that's online on the Value Center website. This is their next step. So they just finished a major vaccine campaign, and they wanted to check in with their people because stress levels had been extremely high. They wanted to check in with their production teams. So this is 4 teams, 1 management team. And the third is a service department, which is engineering, maintenance, validation, all kinds of services. And they service multiple internal clients. about 10. Their management team also embarked on a journey of team and leadership development. However, coming from a place where there was high work pressure, high workload, difficulty to prioritize, and high stress levels. Yes, multiple burnout cases. So that's what we're going to look at. All right. Then, before that, a little bit about the background of this assessment, because for some people may be new. During COVID, one of our clients asked us to propose for a well-being program, asked us to make a proposal. And during those conversations, one of the questions was, how do you measure success? Which we had no answer. And we looked around in market, we couldn't find tools that we found relevant and usable for that situation. So then I called Tom, and Tom said, please call Crystal. And together with Crystal during COVID, we had plenty of time. We developed this value survey, this well-being survey. So first, and that's maybe a question to open in the chat, or we can also do it live. This simple question: why do we come to work? So maybe I put some answers in the chat, or go off mute, or raise your digital hand. I can't see them all, but probably Jessica or Mel can. Why do we come to work?
We've got one in the chat to make a positive impact.
Yeah,
and
I can
earn
see
a
that.
living, make a difference. These are great.
Fulfillment, meaningfulness, to give ourselves to the world.
Because
I love what I do. Feel that I have a meaning, contributing. Salary, of course. Yeah. Add value, money, corporation, meaning, use my talents to create value. Perfect. To connect, be part of something bigger, have impact. Amazing. Being social. Little seed to a better world. Help others. Brilliant. Yes. Absolutely. All of them. It's not just one of them, it's all of them, right? Support my family, express fulfillment, assist others. Brilliant. We often start workshops with this question. And of course, if you look through it, and those who've seen value surveys before and seen the Barrett model before, exactly, Charlotte has answered the question. 7 levels. And they're all here, right? And so, also, just asking, I was a little anecdote. I like to share stories. So a little anecdote here. Some years ago, I was in Greece, and I was asked to talk to 5 shift leaders from our production department, plus some additional people there. And I asked the same question to start off. Some of them didn't speak English, so they were translating amongst each other, and then somehow we could communicate. So I asked the question, why do I come to work? Why do you come to work? And they started answering, and then at one point, some person raised their hands and said, in Greek, which they translated, I think, if I'm honest, I come to work because I went there yesterday too. Which is, and he realized when he said it, what that meant. And so he never thought about that. And in Greece back then, economic crisis, very happy to have a job in the first place. But then he worked for an energy company. And so he left that session with some of the things you're answering here, on top of what he already had. So that question is amazing. And the answers equally. So this, of course, summarizes all the answers. And this is the well-being perspective on the 7 levels, if you will, where there is a little, so we have the usual physical relationships, competence, etc. But here in the middle, there's an interesting one because it's a combination. It's both autonomy and growth at level 4. And I'm not going too far into that because I'd have to look at Crystal for that. But just remember, because it will show up in the assessments later also, the results, this is a combined level, autonomy and growth. And if to go a little bit ahead, in many corporates, many large corporate organizations, people feel low autonomy and high growth. High challenging environment, but low autonomy. Which is kind of typical, but we'll get to that later. So this is the basis that we use to structure our results and to analyze the results of the survey. Okay. So how do I continue? All right. So this is a very simple one, but has had already major impact. So how do we look at well-being? What determines how we feel? One part, of course, is the middle, is the previous slide, is our individual process. Are my needs met? It's very subjective, right? It can be different for many people. It can be even different from year to year. If something happens in the family, or I'm moving, or something happens, those needs might change. So this in the middle is obvious. And if I walk into many companies, in the hallway, there's always these big billboards saying, sign up for this mindfulness class, or let's go for lunch walks, or did you get your steps today? Or we're organizing this global steps competition. You can sign up with teams, etc. Basically, I see some people laughing, so probably recognize a few things. Basically, that says, well-being is your problem. There's not something on that same billboard that says, how have you inspired your people today, the people you're leading today, or how did you feel today? So that's an interesting one. So the left one here is work environment. And again, 7 levels: physical work environment up to purpose and everything in between. Now, just presenting this slide to this QC team triggered a collective relief, because they realized it was not only their problem. It also could have to do, it was okay to say that this work environment is not really beneficial for me. So that was already just this simple slide. Big step. So this is how we look at well-being. Work environment, psychological processes, and individual needs lead to well-being. And we're also very short about how do we look at well-being. We're looking at the more longer-term well-being, not the short-term, as they call it, hedonic happiness, but a more eudaimonic happiness. There's very, very interesting work by Professor Laurie Santos of Yale, the science of well-being. It's really, really, really fascinating. But that's not about what we're talking about today. All right. If there's any questions in the meantime, please raise hands or put them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll just move on. So what we're looking at, in what you're going to see, is these different perspectives. Needs fulfillment. So what in the beginning, when we were developing this, we thought, how awesome would it be if this would have a bar saying my needs at this level are 75% met, or our needs in this company at purpose, and at level 6 would be maybe 50% or 80%, so that we could know what do we need to focus on. So that was one of the early ideas I remember. So that's one. The other is, of course, work environment. Is it helping or is it causing stress? Second is, or third is, and this is a tricky one, how do you measure this short-term or long-term happiness? How do you ask? And we came down to asking people how they have felt over the last period. So how do you feel most often? I'll talk about that later, because feelings, asking people for feelings and emotions is different than asking people for values and behaviors. Somehow it's way more personal. Then there are things that we can also, same as we do in values, we ask people for what would you need, what would you like, what do you want to improve here. And then there's this reference to the four most important measures globally: great workplace, intention to stay, job satisfaction, and high engagement. So we're asking questions in that area too, because that's how many organizations compare each other to each other. All right. Okay, so next. So this is a high-level example of what we're going to look at. So these are the areas, and this is how they are displayed, if you will. So first there's an overall score. Then there's these four elements I just talked about, where with engagement, and that I may turn to Crystal for some comments here, we worked a little bit with how to give this a value that corresponds a little bit with the others, because this tends, if we do it straightforward, this tends to be quite low. Then here there's, on the right, there's work environment, stressors and positives, feelings, depleting feelings, and positive feelings. And then there's these bars, which for me are, these bars say everything. It's a bit like the dots in the value surveys, if you know those. And then there's most fulfilled, least fulfilled. So this is a high-level summary of what we're looking at. All right. So this is the kind of questions we're asking. So, and from the following list, please select 10 feelings that you most often experience at work. That's similar to how we measure culture through values. And then for the work environment, we did similar. Please select 10 characteristics that best describe your work environment. And this list consists of positives and limiting ones, similar to the values lists. And then there's the request. So please select 5 things that would help you feel more fulfilled at work. That's related to the characteristics of the work environment. And then there's like skill questions per level, and for the key metrics, the great place to work, etc. And then there's formulas. And I know that Jessica and Mel are having this document that describes how these questions link to the results to these formulas. And that's a very useful document. I think you will receive that after this, or maybe even in the chat.
Yeah, we can put it in the chat. And I just want to pull up, there's a question here from Charlotte. Did you consider asking for sickness rates, retention rates, et cetera, or is this considered at the company level?
Well, we do take those into account when we, so for example, in the companies that we were in and the departments, we did look at those, but those are the hard metrics that were available already. So we didn't have to ask them separately. So there's these employee engagement survey, sickness rate, mental health cases, retention rate, all these things, they are hard metrics. And in this organization, everything's like pharma, everything's measured. So all the hard data is available. Yeah, it's a good question.
Great,
very relevant. Okay, so then first, so what we're going to do is I'm going to show you one result and walk through it, and we can talk about this. And then I have two others that I'm going to give to you, and you can talk about that in smaller groups and try to figure out what's the key things here. What topics would you zoom into? What questions would you ask? So this is QC. I have to shift this a little bit. So this is a team leading multiple labs. We're talking about 350 people working in about 8 labs, working for departments, organizations across the world. This team embarked on a journey of leadership development. So that was 1 year, 4 sessions, including this survey. This is what their result was. Overall score. And this is what we've also been working with Crystal, is this team, their well-being level is, if I would work with them, I would expect a higher score here. So there's a big question on when is it healthy. So for me, this one, I usually skip this and look at what's underneath to see what this actually means. And developing these results, in the next reports, you'll see a little bit of a different picture. This is their summary. And this is usually at the end of the report that you're getting, but for this webinar, I put it in front, so we have an overview. This is their need fulfillment, which overall is quite high. 97 on level 6, interconnected, is really high. 94 social relationship level, really high. These two are okay. 86, by the way, purpose. What we find in pharmaceutical companies, that the reason why people work there is very obvious. It's different from people working in, and I'm stereotyping a little bit here, sorry for that. In plastics industry, it's a bit different. If we don't know where our products, what we manufacture is used, is a difficult connection to purpose. But in pharma, it seems to be very, very direct and very clear. So what's interesting here is self-expression and physical is on the lower end of this one, but still above average. Employee experience here on the top right, feelings is 29% negative feelings, so depleting feelings, and the rest is positive, 71. So that's interesting because this suggests that it's quite okay there. Now, what we don't see here is work environment, so I'll take you there first. Sorry about this.
Paul, just while you're finding your slide, just to make a public comment that you'll see these slides, they look different than the actual final report. These were part of the pilot process. So if you're looking at this going, well, that's not the report that I know and love, that's why.
Yeah, this is one of the, I think it was the first. And the interesting thing here was also in debriefing these results, this is a QC department. So within a minute, they said, that's wrong. That number is not right. That is, so they pointed out immediately, no, that can't be true. Within a minute. And then unfortunately, they were able to continue without that being a big problem. So this is their work environment. On the right, we see the words they chose with the levels. And on the left, it's the need fulfillment. Now, this bar at autonomy and growth is this size because it's a combined level here. We haven't corrected that yet. I think in the last one, it's using the same scale. And here's what we see. No, it's not, sorry. So what you do see here, which is different from the value survey, is that there are also negatives at levels 4 to 7. Because a lack of purpose, for example, does not have to have any meaning on the lower levels, but it is something that's missing on the higher levels. All right, now let's go back to where I was before. And we can see that all these slides, we were searching for what's a good way to present these results. And also in that first workshop, some of the pictures I didn't use at all because people were just confused, and me too. And some of them were this one, for example, was very, very meaningful, very clear.
So Paul, there's just a couple of questions coming through, just from a context perspective. How many participants in this survey?
This survey was around 10.
Perfect.
So just a team. It's one team, one layer, and they are with that team of 10 was leading an organization of about 350 people. So there's quite high level managers.
Okay, great. And then there's a question about the scoring. So there was, I think it was 76 that stressed. If you take a look at my pet name for it, the product monograph, you'll see the bands of the final scoring that is in there for your reference. So you've got that as a resource tool. So it is different. We went back and forth on how to do the scaling of the well-being score, just so you have the final one. And then,
is that something I have to answer?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, Jess just put it in the chat line again. Thank you, Jess.
Oh, cool. Oh, the categories. Yeah. And the challenge. Get rid of the chat. Otherwise, I don't see. The challenge, of course, here is how to turn this from an intellectual exercise to a feeling experiential exercise. So what's the stories behind this? Because, and this was an exploration of about 2 hours with them, trying to find how come we are 94 at 2, 97 at 6, 86 at level 7, but then what's this? What's happening here? What's your first guesses here? If you see this, or your first questions?
Go ahead and pop them in the chat line, or feel free to jump off mute and have a conversation. Are people empowered enough? Or rules that need to be met are also coming up.
That's a good question. Free speech. So this in the middle, this level 4, said there, and I said that before, autonomy was quite low. Conforming is critical, absolutely. Overworked, not yet. Psychological safety, leadership. So the interesting thing is that this relational level is 94, it's really high. And also on an entropy level from a values perspective, it's also quite low, under 20. So interconnected, they were working together as a team. Their management team meetings were extremely open. From a personal level to, there were no topics that couldn't be talked about. But autonomy, as in how much space do we have to move outside of that meeting, was quite low. Quite low. So autonomy here was quite low, and challenged growth was quite high. They had really challenging jobs. Then this 62, one of the sad realizations was that it didn't really matter who you were as a person, what you liked. It mattered how you performed. But so the lack of that part combined with little autonomy leads to frustration at 3. So they were quite frustrated. And the reason why they got into that as a team, many standards, yeah, absolutely. The reason why they got into that as a team was that they were basically too nice to their outside world. So at the beginning of the year, they would make agreements with all their internal clients saying, we're going to do this many tests for you and these products. And and then they negotiate it with their direct management. This is the amount of people that we need and the amount of equipment, etc. And then 2 months into the year, the products would change, the amount of tests would be higher, and they wouldn't recontract, renegotiate. They would just absorb. So what you see here is this is the result of absorbing 6 months of scope changes in their workload, both in terms of volume and in terms of the kind of products that requires different assays, different tests, different equipment, which from then with their line management, they couldn't get any approval for or had really difficulty. So really kind people here. And at the same time, very high level people. So it's people where reflection is a given, self-reflection. That's why the meetings were so open. This is also one of the pictures in the report. What you'll see in the later ones is that they'll turn around. So the orange and red are on the left, and the green and turquoise are on the right. But here it's like this. And what you also see is that there's no dark red, which in the others there are in people in dark red. But so this is it shows their manager how they are doing. So this is about individuals. We also experimented in this team with individual well-being reports, but that was quite hard because there's, and Crystal can explain this better than me, that there's some collective patterns that are taken into account in the formulas, which you can't do on a personal level, individual level. All right, then next. This one we didn't use, too complex. People somehow got confused over this one, and it doesn't exist in the later one anymore. Very on time. Okay. This shows all the words that were selected in how do we feel, and also then transferred to the levels. So here you can see that there's quite some stressors at levels 3 and 4 and 1.
And Paul, real quick, one thing I wanted to clarify for the group, I'm not sure if everyone saw the comment, but initially, so in these results you're seeing here, initially in the pilot, we did have double the amount of responses for level 4. So we had that with growth and autonomy, there are that many responses that correlated to those options at level 4, making it double than the rest of the levels. Since the pilot, we've adjusted level 4 down to have the same number of responses available as all the other levels. So it wouldn't be so heavily weighted.
Yeah.
Just to clarify.
Yes, thank you. And so here, that's not done yet. So level 3 is really big here, because it's bigger than the combined autonomy and growth level. This is drawing a lot of attention, apparently, in that organization, in that team. All right, we need to make a bit of speed. This we looked at, this we looked at. We're not looking at these. So high level, conclusions and actions. This is a team, as I said, high skill levels in collaboration. Really, for me, for example, I like to use my own experience also in working with these people as a reference to how true is this and how does it work. But it's really easy to work with them. If you walk into a workshop room with them, it's just really easy to be there and to be yourself and to do whatever you want to do. They also don't. This was the first report. There were a couple of errors. They indicate and they don't mind. They just continue. They don't judge. They just say that's wrong and then continue. So easy to work with. Also quite ambitious and very experienced. This is what we talked about, and this was the main reason for this organizational reason for these results. So they were recontracting the scope with their higher management. Interestingly enough, a year later, I think almost 80% of these people went into different jobs, into promotions. And so they're rebuilding that team from the ground up again. But they are building in quarterly calibrations and adjustments of these agreements because they did see they were pushing people into high workloads and high stress. One thing that's at the end of the presentation that this leader and at the end of the workshop said, this is something that we already felt, but it wasn't explicit enough to be aware of it. And this survey helped them become aware and interpret that feeling of what do we need to do? All right, any questions so far? There is one. What if the word that expresses the feeling characteristics best is not in the list? What options do people have to come up with their own word?
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, because actually in the pilot, we did have the option of a free space answer where people could actually add something both in the work environment and the feelings that they were experiencing. It also helped us to see, okay, what might be missing on our list. In the final version, though, we do not allow for that free space option. It could be something that we consider in the future bringing back.
Yeah, I do remember that putting that list of words together and connecting them to the levels was, I think that has taken us about 4 months or something like that. Because it's like, and it's more even than values, it's subject to interpretation, and feelings and emotions are extremely personal, and they are depending on or related to our emotional intelligence. And in other work that we do, it's more self-development courses. Some people where someone sends anger, someone receives love. Because of and that's because this translation doesn't necessarily is a bit garbled from their upbringing. So more even than with values, the what do you mean with this word is important. And so what we saw during the debriefing, that the conversation started with all the attention at the charts. And slowly the attention went from the charts to that space in between them on the table or in the circle. That's where they built their shared understanding of this survey, and not the charts. I mean, it's not a physical something that you can see, but there is this energy on the table or in the circle that they are building together. And at some point they say, okay, so now we understand. Cool, good question. All right, so the two situations that we are going to invite you to look at. First is engineering and maintenance. So this team leads about 40 people and about 75 contractors. They're doing regular maintenance, they're doing projects, they're doing validation projects. They went on a leadership journey about 2 years ago, and they really had difficulty with high stress levels over longer periods of time. So years and multiple cases of burnout or related or similar, more than average. That's one. This is the second. This is the production department, about 50 people. Multiple disciplines, 4 teams. So 3 production teams and 1 support team. All, also the engineering and maintenance department, all higher educated people. So either high school or university. They just finished a major vaccine campaign. And they wanted to check in with their people. How are we doing? All right, so high level reports. I'll just walk through this very quickly. So this is a changed version of the first slide. It's got the 4 key metrics and it's got this measure. The arrow's gone, I think. So overall results, this is the summary. So don't be fooled by the long bars. These are all, except for this one, lower than the previous one. The stress levels are high. 51% in the work environment, 42% experience. These metrics really, really low. And this engagement score is now compensated. So the 29% of the previous is actually higher than this. That's a metric thing that Crystal might be able to explain. Maybe too complex for now, I don't know.
I guess just to touch on the high engagement score a little bit, it is something that you could expect to be less than the scores on the other organizational outcomes. So it is feasible that 100% of people may say this is a great place to work. It's not truly feasible for 100% of people to respond favorably, either agree or strongly agree, that they're always full of energy when they come to work. They feel really alive. They look forward to going to work. So it's really rare to be able to get that from 100% of the workforce. And so that's why often engagement scores are really often more around 30%. In high performing organizations, they could be as high as 75%. But yeah, so most often that high engagement score might look a little off and look a little low compared to the rest.
Thank you, Crystal. This question in the chat by Lila about the open comments. We did in 2 of these have these open comments, and yes, they were very illustrative. And the second, and Martin having 3 or 4 conversations based on each stage of the survey questions. Yeah, that's a bit of a deep dive into the survey. And what we did in the workshops is actually not look at these results too much as these summary slides, but really going into, for example, this one. This is quite shocking. 59% poor or very poor. And into these kinds of slides. We went into these quite extensively. What does this say? How does this relate to your experience? All right, but you're going to have plenty of time in the breakout group to go into these. Just to go to the summary, and you'll see the slides are a bit different here. They're more simple and more straightforward. But you'll get these results in the chat, so you can have a look at those. Maybe, Jess, you can put them in. Ah, cool, there they are. Okay, so then production department is here. Overall, and this is so this 29% is the old score. So these are a bit higher. And this is their summary. So this is interesting. These needs fulfillments and also stress levels are a bit lower, but still significant. Great task and goals guided. Oh, yes, this is their individual, their personal perspective on how people are doing. A bit better than the previous one, significantly better, but still challenged some of them. Welcome back, everyone. How were your conversations? I hope they were inspiring, energizing, interesting, found all kinds of stuff that I haven't seen yet. So I'm hoping
confusing.
Confusing. Oh, I recognize that one. Oh, yes. I think first half hour of many of the debriefings were very confusing for everyone, including us and me. So maybe group by group, observations, questions, interesting things, sources for confusion. Who wants to go first?
I think
Please.
Lily and myself, we were in a group together. I think doing the group one, so the engineering and maintenance team.
Mm-hmm.
And we were indeed confused, but at a higher level after our discussion. We had some questions, especially because it looked like there was a difference between really the work environment and how people experience their work. So it was interesting. And Lily, please add or comment when I don't say it as we discuss. It felt like there was sort of duality, like there are two groups, a group that is happy, have a supportive manager and feel okay. And there's a group that's completely the opposite and requests the same things that people say that are already there. So that was interesting so that I would try to find out more about that situation when you're there. And we also felt there was a lot of attention on the bottom level, so on the stress and the survival and things like that, that people are not really having energy to look at the more higher levels because they're just trying to deal with the stress that they have. Lily, can you add?
Yes, if I could add two more things. So as Charlotte mentioned on the relationships, it was confusing for us that when you looked at the work environment, there was both positive as collaboration and negative as poor group cooperation. So we thought, as it's a service department, perhaps it's that either the team is well connected, but they are not well connected to their customers or vice versa. So there seemed to be a duality in the relationships. And in terms of work environment, it was mentioned positive and negative, but when you went to employee experience, it was only positive and very strong. So that jumped out for us. And why is that? And the next thing is, when we looked at the totality of what might be causing the issues, as Charlotte mentioned, it was really at the bottom part of the pyramid. So the survival, the basics are not in place in effect. So there was lack of clarity on goals. And yeah, I said it to myself, they just don't feel supported by management in terms of training, anything they would need to do their job. They are quite overwhelmed and stressed. So these were our findings and questions.
Well done. 100% accurate. Sorry.
No, we were also EM. So I was just going to add, I was with Rosalie and Viviana, they might want to add something, but agree with everything you've come up with, like your insights. But I mean, clearly, we were very curious about context. We'd love to know more around, is this a new
I don't hear anything.
Me neither.
Yeah, I think he's got a bad connection.
Maybe the thunderstorm is there now. It's just leaving after them.
Oh no, we lost him.
Now it disappeared.
What, Paul, if I may, can
a new
I?
product was very overpressured, under-resourced. Was quite interesting for us. Oh yeah, maybe, is that any clearer? Carry on.
Hey Lou, you're a little bit choppy there. Your video went in and out, so we couldn't quite hear you. Do you want to try keep your video off and then re-say what you just said, because we missed like 100% of it.
So we were curious about the context, just to understand that better. Is this a permanent situation for E&M? We were quite interested to know how leadership responded, because if E&M are feeling this bad about their level of competence and their pressure, ultimately that's going to translate into product and all kinds of other stuff. So what are they doing about that? It's not sustainable. I don't know if Rosalie wants to add anything, or Viviana.
No additional comments. Just curious about the moment that the organization is living. Yes, because they talk about the leadership, they talk about the environment, but you have a low a good relationship, but a low contribution between and a high pressure. So I would like to understand the moment of the organization.
And Viviana, are we okay? All right. Really good questions, and really, those are the starting points of all the conversations, both the context, but also the local situation. So, for example, I think Charlotte shared supportive manager, but also a need for a better manager. This team was, in the beginning, when we started, composed of people who were promoted technicians, like my first supervisor role. I got feedback after a few weeks of the team members that basically said, if you're going to continue like this, we'll be looking for another team. Because I was a great engineer, but I sucked at being a supervisor. And so fast forward 1.5 years, 2 of the supervisors have stepped down because they can't handle the stress, and they like the content and the technical stuff better. 2 new managers have been hired. And so that's part of the solutions. And now the manager of that department can step up. Context-wise, they are serving about 10 different clients who all think they are the most important department of the company. And although there is a annual goal-setting priority process, in the moment when there's 5 people at your desk saying, my thing needs to be fixed first, the technician is faced with that challenge. And these supervisors were not able to take that pressure away from these technicians. Overall, these technicians, and so there is high workload. There is also just a lot of work, too much. But without prioritization, without sufficient planning, and also without the skills and the self-esteem to say no, or not now, or tomorrow, or next week, you get these overwhelmed, frustrated, pressured, burning out people, which was what was happening. And this was quite, I mean, you've seen the stress levels, quite extreme. The intervention that this management team did was they organized a 2-week timeout, where they said to all their clients and to their high management, we are only going to do regular priority level 1 maintenance, and we stop all the projects, put everything else on hold because we're not going to survive. We are literally pushing people out the door to psychologists, and their management supported that. So this was quite a extreme, significant measure. During those weeks, they developed a resource planning prioritization process, which they started implementing and aligning with their clients. After that 2 weeks, they've organized, I think it's 4-hour work sessions where they are improving this process, because you can develop it in 2 weeks, but it takes a half a year to a year to implement and be successful. So that's the process system side. On a personal side, they are offering stress management, specific individual support for people that are overwhelmed or are stressed, professional help for people that were theoretically already in burnout but still working, and they are now starting it's called leadership development program, but for everyone, not just for higher people, also for engineers. Now, that was the timeout was 2 months after we did the survey, somewhere last year. 2 months ago, they had their quarterly thermometer, culture thermo, how are we doing, which already showed an improvement, I think, of about 30%. And they already saw people that there was this, you can feel when there's this collective relief. Now this is finally been taken seriously. Now we are really taking measures to improve this. And that's happening. And the interesting thing there is that in the middle, in their context, they are now reorganizing this whole bigger organization, which causes a lot of uncertainty and stress in other departments. But here we can see they're still doing well. Because if you would have a thermometer for self-esteem, that really has increased. And there's still people being supported that are still having a difficult time, but they are, let's say, on track. So 4 to 6 months from now, they'll be stable and more healthy. Good questions, good observations, very sharp. So this tells you a lot, this report. And it's also, I don't know how many of you have experience with the value surveys, but it's very much in the uncomfortable zone of what you talk about with clients and with managers. It's emotions, it's feelings. People feel pressured, they feel stressed, overwhelmed, frustrated. And in values, there's not much judgment. In the values list, there's a few words that are also in this area, like bullying, exploitation. But all these negative words in the well-being survey are easily received with judgment, with a personal judgment. I'm not doing a good job as a leader. And in the value surveys, in my experience, that's a bit different. I'm curious also to hear your thoughts here. Did you actually measure self-esteem? No. If anyone knows a good measure, sorry, Lila, you raise your hand.
Yes, thank you. I just want to go back to one part of the solution, because you said earlier that really struck me, that well-being is not only your problem or not your problem. That really spoke to me, that the responsibility for somebody's well-being is not just rests on the individual. And I heard you here as part of the solution that they have put systematic solutions in place to get the pressure off. And I'm wondering, what did they do on a personal level? So some things that people highlighted, like lack of training or the management, told me that they are not feeling seen and valued. And that's not necessarily a systemic solution that has to do with personal relationships, etc. So can you tell a bit more about that? What has happened that in that area that people felt more valued after this?
Well, from my perspective, the most important thing is that they hired 2 experienced leaders to replace the 2 technicians that were supervisors, because those people, they know more about leading people. And the effect of that was that people felt more seen and heard. And they were also taking the signals more seriously, where previously people were they were hearing the signals, but they had no idea how to respond, which was part of the team. Part of the team journey is, this is where we are, this is where we need to get to, and describing the team where we need to get to. In that description, it said we need experienced people leaders more than just managers or technical leaders. So that was one part, and then the effect of that was that they created space for personal development programs, for support for people who were in trouble, who were challenged, and also there was a little bit of demand for more technical or rational trainings like time management, prioritization. But the other part was way more important. So the managers and the self-development, because with low self-esteem, you can't compensate low self-esteem with effective time management. That solutions at different levels doesn't really connect, or it will just help temporarily. But those managers are doing most of the work. For me, it's way more hands-off now.
Yeah, that's great to hear that they dare to make those changes in leadership, what people have asked for. So that's a very good step. Thank you.
You're welcome. And this department manager himself signed up for a very intensive personal/leadership development program. Very intensive. He made big steps also.
I have a question or a reflection. We looked at the production assessment, and when we talked about it, reflection that I did was really maybe lack of our experience of actually looking at the results, probably that. But when we look at the different graphs, we sort of, we had to go back to the model and look at the model. What does it really mean? And that, and when we came down to the words of stressors and strengths and stuff like that, then all of a sudden we could make a story out of how does it work in this organization. A question that pops up is really, is it, how does the customer see the result, because they are experiencing this, so how are they reading the graphs versus reading the actual words? And how do you actually analyze that? Because I guess you have to go in and tell the customer, this is what the 7 level means, and the graphs shows this. So it's a lot of explanations before you can start doing the analysis, and still you don't know if they get what the 7 levels are, right?
Yes, and so first of all, it's I have to take my hat off for all of you, because looking at a report with a few stories from me without actually having spoken to anyone in that company is already a mission impossible, or is very challenging. So that's the first one. It's very dry material. Second, how do they look at the results? Is we use a pretty standard process. From the first question I ask, why do you come to work? And I ask that to them. I'm not explaining any models, just ask those questions. And we build up this Maslow-Barrett model. The other thing is we look at what drives our behavior. So we build up this iceberg. I'm pretty sure everyone's familiar with those. And from there, we go into these levels, and we ask people to reflect on where are you in your life in these levels. There's a very simple exercise. I think Phil or Tor created that, which is somewhere available. We have this little line saying, do you have all the resources you need for your work? If you do, please stand up. If you don't, please sit down. And we go through all the 7 levels. So people have more of a physical experience with these levels. And then we go into explaining this model where I try, same with values, I try to distinguish between what are we looking at. So the agenda, the explanation of the graphics, and then go into, okay, so is it clear what we're looking at a rational intellectual level? And then we go into the feeling experiential part. So what's the stories here? And trying to ask questions that gets them into their memory or their experience, and not into their ratio. Every time they ask a rational question, I know I have to switch to feeling. So I try to get to the source of the question to get to their feelings and their feeling level. Otherwise, it's. I said when you were in the breakout rooms to Melanie, the first time I did values survey debriefing long time ago, the client basically said afterwards, I don't know why you use this tool, because of a very rational experience. And 10 years later, did the same for the same client. He said, we did that before, but that was very different. Now I get it, which was because I was more comfortable and not intellectualizing everything we saw. Yeah. So it's very much getting to the stories, how and trying to. So the observations that most of you did were very much at a feeling level, and not a rational. There was a few rational questions in the beginning, but that's normal. Also, our intellect at another level has to be saying, okay, this is valid, let's move on. And then we can get to experiential level. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I feel just looking at the regular the CVA, when doing that and explaining the model, I feel that a lot of people, if they're not very engaged, it feels like just more or less tell us, we understand the different levels, but here we need to do the analysis ourselves with and compare between the experience, the organization, and the feelings, and all of a sudden it becomes very. Is it a risk to become too much information in one go?
Yeah, but I have that with CVAs too.
Yeah. This gives me even more. But okay, I need to work with this, so I get it internalize it to myself. So that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, and for me, is the challenging part is that this, as I said, this is feelings and emotions, and they are experienced and labeled. Now they're labeled differently in different cultures, different languages, and what I find offensive, someone else may find completely normal. And so that's something we have to take into. Sometimes, if it's a very diverse audience in terms of nationalities, we do some kind of national cultures exercise first, just to get people to we are all looking at that differently. We're seeing different things, different meanings. So we need to get to that first. But, yeah. But it's learning, getting to know and to understand how they work, how the dynamics of that team are, and how we can somehow place these results in a meaningful way into that dynamics.
Did you do any interviews before you did this assessment?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and we've since these were pilots, I've chosen clients and people that I'd worked with longer. So I knew them. 3 and 7 years. Very familiar people, also people that I could present a prototype result to, and without having them resist it, but just saying, okay, so that's different, that's maybe wrong, and that's a different number, and that bar needs to be longer. And then, okay, so thank you for the feedback, give it all to Crystal, and then we move on to interpret.
Had they done the CVA before as well, so they were acquainted to the model or the way of working?
The production department, we had a 4-year journey with 3 CVAs.
Yeah.
With how do you call those, evolution reports, with LDRs. They're very familiar. The QC people, I think there were only 2 that had seen the value surveys before, and the other department, the management team, we have done team value surveys with, yes. Not the whole crowd, not the whole population.
And my last question then.
Sure.
What did they say about the difference between these 2? If they done the CVA before and now they did this?
QC
their reactions.
QC manager was very explicit. She said the value survey would have never given us these insights. She said that this made something they felt and were aware of, but very, very subtle, made it to the awareness level, and they, so that they could interpret and take action on it. You know, sometimes there's this something you feel, but you're not sure, and they all have it, and we all think it's something different. And now suddenly, when they interpret it the same way, say, oh, that's it, and then they could turn it into action, which he was very clear on. The engineering people had a well-being problem, so that was obvious. They even asked for it. Don't you have anything in this area? And they knew the value survey.
Yeah.
The production department wanted to check in on their well-being. They could have done a value survey too, because they knew it. But basically I said, here's this prototype, which may very well suit your request, your wish, to check in with people's well-being. And they very much did. I only did debriefings with their team once, and then they took it all by themselves. Further, the follow-up was, they did have really good supervisors. There's only one team. The production department's scores are a bit colored because there's one team scoring quite low, and the others are scoring relatively high, which might have been. Which you might have seen in some contradictory results.
We saw
if
that.
you look below the so that was caused by very inexperienced supervisors and a team that was 2 teams that were merged into one that wasn't finished yet, that process, and 2 inexperienced supervisors. But they've followed up very much themselves. Good questions, Johan. Thank you. Thank you, Esther. I'll connect to you. Sorry.
Sorry, Paul, can I ask also a question just with your experience now? I mean, it's quite clear that this was very valuable to your client. But in working with big clients, would you recommend like alternating CVA and the Wellbeing survey, or is your tendency now to use the Wellbeing more? I'm just keen to know strategically what you think adds more value, or what the context would be for the different surveys.
So the majority of our work is culture transformation programs. And for that purpose, we use value surveys. We have had these conversations for multiple reasons. One of the reasons is that it easily combines with at different levels, teams, whole companies, easy demographics, and that probably can work for well-being too, and also the link to LDRs, to 360s. So we tend to close that loop quite often so that people can see how are we creating, how am I contributing to this culture that we want to change? And this whole well-being survey comes from a question of a client that was asking the, let's say, default companies that you would hire for well-being programs. In Dutch, I don't know if it translates, it's the traditional labor kind of companies that service support for HR departments for employees. And they asked us also as a strange duck, because they had experience with us. And so they asked, we would like to hear your perspective on this topic. That's why I reached out then. If you say alternating, probably not. I would stick to one. If you would do longer term stuff, I'd stick to one, because usually they have more surveys. And this is the next one. So I wouldn't necessarily alternate. I would choose. And from my understanding of everything now is I use value surveys usually default because of the culture transformation programs and well-being specifically where there's a question in that area. But that may change in the future.
Lou, some of the things we're doing here at BVC is actually doing all three year over year. So we did them last year, we'll do them again this year, where we do LDRs, well-being, and CVA, and really starting to play with the data year over year to see what the interconnections are or are not, and what's the value that can bring to the table for an organization. What could that look like? It's a little bit of experimentation right now with how we dance with all three.
Any last questions? Otherwise, I have a final learnings and conclusion slide of our side, of which some of it is already discussed.
I wanted to address just one quick technical thing real quick, where I think it was Lila that brought up, or someone brought up, how sometimes at the end where you're looking at those need or level snapshots, and it can list the same attribute in the work environment as both a strength and something that's being requested. And what I was able to do in the pilot was actually go through and see there was a different set of people that were identifying that aspect as a strength. And it was the opposite people that were identifying it as a request for fulfillment. So most often, those were different people. Not all the time, but the vast majority. So they're having different experiences in that way. And sometimes I think it's confusing when you see it listed on both columns.
Yeah. What was also interesting is that there were people asking for better pay. Yet in the feelings, there were no red feelings in level 1. And if you look at satisfiers, dissatisfiers, this Hertzberg theory, in the context there's a very competitive labor market, very hard to find employees. So so salaries rise, and so they hear all these conversations in their surroundings about salaries, and their colleague is leaving for a better offer, yet they still earn enough to make a living. So there's no concerns at that. There's no worries. It's something in their context. It's very interesting. That's also what the survey clearly illustrates. What is mine? What is context? And that's something that the value survey may not illustrate that clearly. Thinking about it now. Okay, just a final slide. I think we covered everything here. So this is is feedback from client and the lessons learned. This I explained. It's a big thing, and Lila already emphasized it again. The fact that well-being is not only your problem incorporates a big thing. They even don't understand the relationship between some of the things they're offering in a well-being perspective. So, for example, mindfulness trainings how that relates to better leadership. Some of them don't either. I had to explain a couple of weeks ago to a leadership team where they had no clue that it was actually useful for them in their jobs. Then asking how people feel is very different from asking people which values and behaviors they hold or experience. That's also what we talked about. This is, you're entering the personal feelings and emotions space, which is for some leaders quite uncomfortable. So it takes a lot of courage, openness, vulnerability to actually receive and hear these results. So this is puts a different demand on us as facilitators. I talked about this. Surveys assisted us to become aware of things we felt but could not put our finger on. And this is also what I talked about, to make it a feeling experiential exercise. So this is at the moment the most important thing. They're still quite high level. As I said during the groups, give me 5 or 6 or 10 more of these, then the experience become more refined. And also the requests to improvements become more refined. At the moment, it's still quite, in my experience, quite rough. All right. I think that is the end. Any final questions? Any other things?
Paul, just thank you very much on behalf of BVC and the network, and Crystal for your support in, of course, developing this survey in the first place. Thank you to both of you guys for all you've done, and having that client experiential feedback that you've been giving us. It really helps to kind of round out, the survey. And as we are all new playing with this thing, it will feel a little uncomfortable, Johan, for sure, as we dive in and do our first well-being, just like the flashback to that first CBA. Never pretty, but you get through it. So thank you guys for joining. Really appreciate it. We will record. If you have any more questions, learning at valuecenter.com, and we'll filter them over to Paul, and we can send out some FAQs from whatever comes back.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and if anyone wants to share experiences, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or through BVC. Thank you all for joining. It was a pleasure to do it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Thanks so much.
Bye.